Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you might be around the world. And there are many of you all over the world here today. Of course, I am Jay Campbell, and to my left or your right is Hunter Williams. And of course, we are joined by the amazing, the infamous Laura Knight-Jadczyk. Laura, what's going on? How are you?
I'm still infamous, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. We have a delay here. My apologies, guys. I had a reverb. It's awesome to see you. So the last time that we were together, we were together personally in the summer, but on video, we did a series of 6 podcast episode series on the aspects of hyperdimensional reality. And a lot of you guys all over the world tuned in to watch those. So thank you guys for that. And today we are basically reconnecting, so to speak, to talk about what's going on in the world. Laura, why don't we just ask you, obviously there's been, we've got some talking points that we've surfaced that we may or may not cover here today, but a lot has been made of the UAP phenomenon. There's been some profound, that I've even watched myself on Netflix, really discussing what's going on with, I think a lot of people that are watching this right now are familiar with the Tic Tac thing, but you've got Tucker Carlson talking about UAPs. You've got a bunch of people who have, large mainstream podcasts, including Joe Rogan, including Sean Ryan, talking about this, whatever this is, this anomalous, UFO or hyperdimensionals, or, again, what they title UAPs are. I mean, what do you think is really behind it?
Well, I've been reading. Did you recommend Paranormal Parasites, or did somebody else recommend that?
I recommended that to you.
Okay, well, this is Nick Redfern, and I've been there it is. Yeah, I've been trying to kind of flipping through that a bit. And then I just got the other day Ross Coulthart's in plain sight.
Sure.
And, I don't see anything really new or it's like, it's the same old thing because, frankly, it's been many years since I was directly involved in it. And during that time, I just really got pretty disgusted. I was disgusted not just with, the researchers and the confusion and the back and forth. And Coulthart talks in the beginning of this book about, what should stand as evidence, and that, these hardcore material UFO Cadillac types who want to, kick the wheels on the White House lawn, they demand this extraordinary proof. And that kind of comes from Isaac Asimov and Carl Sagan, that extraordinary claims demand extraordinary proof. And then he discusses witness testimony and how, in our legal system, somebody can be put to death based on witness testimony, and yet witness testimony is completely discounted by anybody who is supposedly scientific or using the scientific method to study the topic of UFOs or UAPs, as they're now calling them. And I think that that's as much to take the stigma off the term. UFOs, and you think of flying saucers and little green men. UAPs, this is supposed to be kind of like a little more acceptable terminology. It doesn't have so much baggage attached to it. So I'll probably switch back and forth because I can't make it down. I mean, come on. I'm an old person. Give me a break. But anyhow, yeah, it's been 20 years or more since I was really directly involved with it. And during those years prior to that, 20 years ago, so like 30 years ago, I did a lot of hypnotherapy with, I don't know if I necessarily call it therapy, but I did a lot of hypnosis with so-called alien abductees. And of course, the story how I got into doing that is in, I don't know if y'all have read this book or not.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I talk there about you know, how of all the people in the world who never wanted to know anything about UFOs or UAPs, you know, I deserve a place at the head of the line. Yes, I had always been interested in the paranormal, and I had been reading about that for, you know, I mean, from the time I was, say, 13 or so. And I'd had unusual experiences, both before and after I started reading about it. They weren't, you know, super hyper dramatic, you know, like some of these people, you know, the guy that got struck by lightning and had all these dramatic experiences. And then people like Eileen Garrett, who was a great medium, and other people, you know, who go out and, you know, stand on the hillside and call UFOs or whatever, you know, nothing like that, but still, you know, extraordinary enough that it gets your attention. So I had been studying the paranormal and doing, you know, actual hypnotherapy for quite, I mean, since I was in college. So that was, you know, many years. And I'd had quite a bit of experience with doing things called, you know, past life regressions. And then I got into what is called spirit release therapy or spirit releasement therapy. And that's where I had some encounters that were, you know, fairly dramatic. Did y'all listen to that tape I sent you?
Yes.
I did. Yeah, listen, I didn't have a chance to email you back, but I listened to it last night.
I did too. Yeah. And I actually read the second part too, the transcript, just to see the comparison of listening to it and reading it, but pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah. So these kinds of experiences, you know, were happening before I was forced to cross that line into looking at the issue of UFOs. And, you know, as usual, the universe was, you know, right in step with me, and no longer had I finished reading a great deal about it than I was presented with my first hypnotherapy case of someone who, based on what was coming out of her, and I, you know, I'm very strict about, you know, no leading questions. I mean, it was just coming out that she had what you'd call an abduction or missing time experience. And of course, that, as I've chronicled in the book, was accompanied by UFOs being sighted in my neighborhood and even over my house at the same time that this woman was under hypnosis, you know, in my little office. So, you know, those are fairly dramatic introductions to a subject you don't want to look at because it shattered my worldview.
And by the way, just to go back to that, because I remember reading that your children saw it too, right? It was a triangle ship above.
That was a different event.
Oh, okay, got you.
When we saw the UFO ourselves, that was one thing. But what really gave me, you know, chills was to discover, and I discovered by means of the newspaper, that the damn thing had been, you know, floating over my house at the time. I had this woman under hypnosis, and she was having this really traumatic reliving of an experience. And, you know, it later turned out that her husband was a scientist at Fort Detrick and was in the process of dying, but she apparently had some kind of connections to some kind of secret government activities. So I was just, you know, kind of pulled kicking and screaming into the subject, and I became obsessed with reading everything I could get my hands on. I mean, when I went from a grocery sack full of paperback books about it, you know, Bud Hopkins and you know, that sort of thing, to you know, actually going out and finding everything I could find and purchasing everything I could purchase. And, you know, I literally read until my eyes bled. You know, I got a terrible eye condition from, you know, this intensive reading. And at the end of it all, you know, I considered a lot of things, and I just sat back and looked at the situation. I looked at the confusion. I looked at the properties that people claimed that these objects had. I looked at the capabilities that people claimed that these entities had. I looked at all the different stories, of things that would appear and then disappeared, stories of, we had a piece of an alien craft, or the alien gave us something, and after a couple of days it just disappeared. And you say, what do you mean it just disappeared? It just disappeared? What the hell? So there was all of these factors, and at the time, I was a lot younger, and I could hold everything in my head pretty much simultaneously. I'm a little bit older now, so you're going to have to, bear with me. But what I could see was that this had all the flavor, all the feeling of paranormal activity, with the exception that it went a step beyond, because there was a paraphysical nature to it. I mean, some great mediums can apparently manifest objects. What do they call it? The plasma that they exude.
Ectoplasm.
Yeah, ectoplasm.
Ectoplasm. And so they've got ectoplasmic mediums, and then you've got all kinds of hauntings that have been witnessed down through the centuries. You've got poltergeist activity where, objects fly around. So you have some kind of an interface between some kind of psychic, invisible perpetrator and the physical objects that are actually moving. And, this was something that even occurred with Uri Geller, and it occurred synchronously with UFO or so-called alien sightings or interactions. So you've got what is ostensibly a paranormal phenomenon, but with a kick, paranormal on steroids.
Yeah.
And it's not ghosts, because, I've never read of a ghost that would physically manifest and move around through our reality as a real physical being, such as Men in Black, so to speak.
Right.
Because Men in Black are really highly suspect for being, definite manifestations of this phenomenon. The descriptions you get of those, it's like, something is in our reality that doesn't belong here. So the other factors were their capabilities, passing through walls, controlling weather, apparently being involved in activities that could result in the drinking of blood or the eating of human flesh. And that's something that a lot of researchers don't look at as deeply as they ought to, but human mutilations and cattle mutilations and injuries to individuals who interact with this phenomenon are a very important factor. So you've got basically, and I wrote an article about it way back when. What you've got basically is the skeleton of many ancient legends, and of course Jacques Vallée and a few other people saw this and wrote about, how it was like fairy lore, and how it was like stories of ogres or trolls or whatever. And we were talking about the kind that are under the bridge, not on the internet.
Right.
So, and then of course the vampire. I mean, the vampire with their compelling eyes. Of course, Christopher Lee made it look a little more romantic than a gray alien with big bug eyes.
Right.
Nobody had these eyes, and you go, and Bela Lugosi with his eye routine. That was something. So you've got compelling eyes. You've got creatures that can pass through walls, that they can. I've never read a case where an alien or a purported alien, and I'll put these qualifying, adjectives in front of some of these words, just so you keep yourself straight, because we're not asserting anything as some kind of definite thing here. But I've never heard of them like shape-shifting in the way that, say, Dracula would be able to turn into a wolf,
right,
or the way the man in the movie would be able to transmogrify into a werewolf. But yeah, that doesn't mean that that's not part of the phenomenon,
right.
just because it's not part of the modern phenomenon. Maybe that's something that they've held back on because it would just be too scary for people to deal with that sort of thing. So you've got, as I say, all the earmarks, the hallmarks of a paranormal phenomenon with added density or tangibleness. So, the reason I sent that audio recording to you, because it was an exorcism I did more than 25 years ago. And I mean, the recording quality wasn't as good as I would like it. It was really difficult to hear. But just to give you, an idea of, what paranormal things are going on. And then you look at this book that you recommended to me, The Paranormal Parasites. And that's exactly what I was dealing with there, some sort of paranormal parasite. Well, when you look at the UFO, UAP / alien phenomenon, what you're looking at, in a sense, is based on all of the hallmarks that we've just kind of like discussed, is parasitic.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, Charles Fort said, we are property, and his idea was we are being farmed. And this is what this Nick Redfern is more or less saying, is that we are being farmed. But he is keeping it kind of strictly to almost just paranormal phenomena. Although I did notice in there he had a case where he was talking about alien interactions in Vietnam. Well, I did hypnosis or hypnotherapy with an individual who had a memory of being in a past life in Vietnam and being killed, but he was flying a plane that was transporting, big crates of body parts to drop them off somewhere for aliens to pick them up. That's what he's telling me. So whether that's true or not, I can't assert. I'm just saying this is a witness test. This is witness testimony. So yeah, I think what we're dealing with is something parasitic, something semi-paranormal, and some people would prefer to call it demonic. I don't know if demonic is, well, it's as good a term as any, except that it has a lot of religious connotations. And if you'll notice, in the exorcism that I sent you, it wasn't so much anything I was saying to the individual that caused the entity to finally leave, but it was actually an act of will, me getting angry and demanding the departure. And so I don't know if putting such a religious connotation on it is such a good idea. But you'll notice that those people who do come to the idea that what we're dealing with is a pseudo paranormal phenomenon, they almost immediately turn to religion.
Yeah.
And they I mean, Tucker Carlson is a case in point, and many others, got to get back to God, got to get back to Jesus, go to church, and so on and so forth. Well, I don't have any problem with that, except I think that people should learn more about the phenomenon, because, okay, that's fine if you're just dealing with something that's paranormal. But if you're dealing with something that's pseudo-paranormal, and there is some part of it that's paraphysical or physical in some sense, then you have the opportunity and the obligation and even to examine it as a physical phenomenon with, kind of a little bit of a scientific method. But when we're talking about a scientific method, let's talk about modified scientific method. I mean, scientists say, oh, you have to be able to repeat the experiment. Well, let me tell you what, when you're working with quantum physics, nothing can be repeated.
Right.
Everything is statistical, and everything is, you can't pin anything down. You can't know momentum and position simultaneously. So why don't we just acknowledge that is something like what we're dealing with paranormal or hyperdimensional, as I prefer to call it, phenomena. You're dealing with something that you're not going to be able to repeat every experiment, and you're not going to be able to pin down place and momentum at the same time. There's going to be a necessity for a certain amount of witnessing. And if you think about it, astronomy is a totally witnessing science. I mean, they look at stuff and they say, I saw this and I saw that, and from that I deduce this and deduce that, and we're all expected to believe it. That's witness testimony. I mean, and the Big Bang. Okay, reproduce the experiment. Show me how the Big Bang happened. They can't. So they talk out of both sides of their mouth at once when they start declaring it's got to be scientifically investigated. Well, I agree. This phenomenon needs to be explored and investigated by competent individuals who are open-minded enough to do it in a way that'll, bring some comprehensive and comprehensible solution to what we're dealing with, because I think it's evil. I mean, using that term in kind of a loose way, I think maybe, we are property. Maybe we are being farmed. Maybe they do send paranormal type parasites to feed off of us, as Nick Redfern writes about, and maybe they also eat off of us physically, because
in that book, the parasites, paranormal parasites, which I did recommend to you. When I was reading it this summer, it struck me, because obviously I'm very familiar with your work and in the books, and obviously what the C's have said about the Men in Black, and that's what I remember reaching out to you. Is like, wow. So, and by the way, before I rabbit hole, Nick Redfern is an interesting character in and of himself, like who and what he is, because my brother represented a content company, and I, going from memory, I don't remember what the name of it, but he was managing it, and he was hiring Nick to do articles that were like, I don't want to say Enochian magic stuff, but it was, I don't know, the famous Grimoire author from the early 20th century. He was asking him to write articles about that. And he said his interrelationship with Nick was bizarre, but he did create a contact with me at one time. And I was talking to Nick about coming on my podcast. This is going way back. This is like 4 or 5 years ago, and it never happened. But Nick is a very interesting guy. But to not rabbit hole and to talk about the point I was attempting to make, was that he was the first person that I saw what the C's had said, that the Men in Black were essentially fourth density reptilians in disguise. And it's weird because, like, if you think about all of the movies that Hollywood has made, obviously with the Men in Black, with, Tommy Lee Jones and the black guy, I forget, the Fresh Prince, Will Smith, and then all the subsequent, like, what were they really trying to tell us? Like, were they trying to make the Men in Black harmless to the collective consciousness of Hollywood, viewers, which is the globe? Because to me, that's what they were trying to do, is they were attempting to take a very traumatic, horrific, for anybody who ever experienced Men in Black activity, and make it funny and like attempt to demean it or whatever. Because we talked about this before, the Dan Aykroyd interview where he was visited, that's bone chilling too. And, he gave that interview in like 2003 or 2004. And that shocked me. That was like at the very beginning of my really, chasing this UAP. Now we're all saying UAP instead of UFO, path. But that was like, when I remember watching that video, and it really, really chilled me to the bone, because I was like, this does not sound like a guy who's making this story up. And obviously, as you know, and Hunter, the visit happened right after they canceled his show, which was like, he got notified that day that his show was being canceled, and they had shot like 8 episodes, and I forget the name of the show, but then the Men in Black showed up. And they were basically like letting him know, like, hey, dude, like, this is a cold trail. This ends now for you. You don't want to go any further with this. And again, this is way before I knew what they were, or assumed that I knew what they were from obviously what the C's have told us. But it's all very interesting to try to correlate it to, like, again, what are they doing to the collective consciousness if this is truly a farm and we're a village of the damned, as Charles Fort said.
Well, there's that, and just, anecdotally, Alfred, I think it was Albert Bender, who was
Bender, yeah, Albert.
Yeah. He was visited by men in black, and he got out of the whole field forever. I mean, just
done.
Stopped dead. I mean, that was it. And but yeah, when you consider the potential uses that these types of beings would have for human beings, and if you consider their potential powers,
right,
and you consider the possibility that they can utilize, and I have some anecdotal experience from hypnosis sessions that they do this, that they can utilize purely paranormal type entities to act as conduits of energy, attaching onto a human being in some frequency synchronization kind of way, and then pass the energy along. There's almost no limit to the numbers of people, I think, that could be controlled or mind controlled, manipulated, made crazy. I mean, if you look at the transgender madness, that seems to me to be almost a direct result of this kind of manipulation. You look at characters in government, and that seems to me to be very likely people who are subject to this type of manipulation, because, I mean, let's face it, most of them don't believe in it. So when you don't believe in something, you're extremely susceptible to being, controlled by it. And people in Hollywood and influencers on the internet, we've talked about this before. I don't think they're all necessarily undergrounders. I think that's, sometimes I wonder about Mark Zuckerberg.
I think did they confirm that he was one?
I don't remember, but something like that. But he looks a little hybrid to me. But yeah, I mean, the numbers of people that could be mind manipulated, controlled, especially if they have certain weaknesses, it's just horrifying. And it seems to me that this is what we're looking at when we look out on our world and we see the madness, the absolute utter insanity going on. And even good people can be, who have a strong backbone and intestinal fortitude and principle and so forth, they can be manipulated too. I've seen it happen, but I mean, not so direfully as somebody who's, say, like demonically controlled. But yeah, I mean, what we're seeing is definitely a huge mind job. And
so, Laura,
go ahead.
I think to speak to the Men in Black thing, did we ever tell you the story that we think was Men in Black-esque? And it was actually before we visited you in the summer last year. It was like 2 weeks before we came to France.
Yeah,
did we ever tell you about that? I can't remember.
No, you never told her.
So I'll just tell it, because I wouldn't say it was like a Dan Aykroyd-esque experience. It's a quick story. Jay and I and another one of our business partners were together, and we were meeting a potential business partner that we are business partners with now.
Wow.
I think it was literally like a week or two before we came to France, and we were all in Tampa, Florida, and we go to this like very cheap, like granola kind of hippie restaurant, supposed to have like healthy food and real clean and everything. And it's like 3:00 on a Wednesday afternoon, so no one's there. There's maybe one or two people in the restaurant. We just sit down and we're kind of talking about some business stuff. And probably halfway through, the guy that we were meeting with started acting like he was like on a phone call while he was talking to us in his headphones. He was like, "Hey, I'm sorry, I'm busy." And all of a sudden, I kid you not,
they were
these two guys walk in, and they literally look like they're out of a motorcycle gang, like they're real heavy set.
It was
And they look
bizarre.
like they're like out of like Hell's Angels or something. But one of the guys, I can't really remember the face of one of the guys, but he had like no neck, and he had like slick back, like jet black hair that looked like
And he was
super gel,
white.
like,
Yeah, and he
like
was super
oily.
white face.
He was like really pale, and it's like he had no neck, and he kind of like walked around like this. It was just very bizarre looking, but I didn't think anything of it. I was like, oh, just people coming into the restaurant to eat. But they went to the corner of the restaurant and they sat down. And I remember because my chair was like facing the corner, and they kind of like stared at us.
They were staring at us,
You know,
sucking our energy out.
and you know, when someone's staring at you, you don't like, you kind of just like, okay, whatever. And then, but they kept doing it. And then the guy that we were meeting with, he went in the bathroom and like changed his shirt or something. We're like, what is this guy doing? The guy that we were with, and you know, he was like busy. He was like trying to take phone calls and talk to us at the same time. And we're like, oh man, you're okay, you know. And he went in the bathroom and like changed his shirt. And we're like, why did he just change his shirt? We're like at a restaurant, and we're like, maybe he's just, you know, having a bad day or whatever. And anyway, these guys, they kind of sit there and stare at us the whole time. And again, they have like they're not people that you'd see in that restaurant, but hey, you know, like anyone can go wherever. But they looked like they were in a biker gang, but their shapes didn't look right, and they ambulated very weird. So like when they were walking, it was kind of like this like side to side walk, almost like they didn't have like a erect spine, you know, but it wasn't just that they were like really fat. I don't know. They're almost like a Jello person, if that makes sense. And
Like
anyway,
yeah.
But during this time, you know, like we're talking about business stuff, and we're like, okay, I just didn't think anything of it. And then we go outside, and they also go outside the exact same time as us. It's like that's weird. These people came in, and we were there for probably like an hour because we were just, you know, meeting. We go outside this exact same time, and they just get in this like really big, like F-350 jacked up truck, and then go away. And then when we were talking about it after, they're like, "Did you notice that?"
They didn't
notice
leave.
that when they pulled out, they like the truck turned, but it was like where there wasn't a turnout. If that makes
there was
sense.
no way to get out, and the truck just disappeared.
And it just like disappeared. And so it was kind of one of those things when we talked about it later, it was very hazy to us. So like I'm reporting it back the best of my memory, but I usually don't have like hazy memories. Like I'm very, like I remember stuff even when I was a child, like very fresh. But it was just weird. And we didn't at the time, we talked about it after, realize how bizarre it was. Because we kind of all felt like we were in a haze in the restaurant.
Well, we were completely drained, remember, on the ride home. So a couple other things you left off that were insane that we didn't realize until later is that I lost my ATM card, and Bobby lost his license. And Laura, as we were driving home, the three of us back to my home, the three of us literally were like, I'm so tired. Like all three of us were like, I feel like we need to just pull over and take a nap. And we were super energized and had a really productive discussion while we're, you know, at this restaurant. But all three of us felt that. But as Hunter's saying, like we're talking about it now as like we knew what was going on, but we had no idea at the time. It was something that we thought about later, because when we were all back home talking about how like I lost my ATM card, the other guy who was potentially our business partner lost his license, which he never recovered.
Never found his license either.
Yeah,
he didn't take it out. He didn't take it out while he was there or anything. Like he didn't.
It was
take
the
it
most
out
insane, weird thing. But we were sitting there, and then all of us just like it almost like was implanted in our minds. We started talking about the guys, and we're like, weren't they the most bizarre? Like, what really happened? But the thing that freaked me out, because I was the one driving, was when we tried to leave the parking lot, we let them go because they backed out in front of us, still, of course, staring at us. And then they went, and as Hunter said, they had this giant jacked up truck. They went straight. And then we started talking amongst ourselves. And, you know, it was kind of like, okay, I'm going to let this guy go and then I'll go. And so I went out to follow him. And then when I went to follow him, we realized, because we were in a place that we had never been before in St. Petersburg, where like, there's no exit. And then all three of us are like, where did that truck go? Like, what? But then we were just kind of like, oh, we must have just lost track of it or whatever. But I'm serious. Like all three of us were in a serious haze. We had our energy drained, which obviously, as you know, is what happens when you deal with these beings. Something else I was going to tell you, that because you brought it up about Bender, there's a documentary on Netflix right now, and when you or Hunter start talking again, I'll research and pull it up. But it's in the top like 15 shows on Netflix right now. It's a documentary. I forget what it's called. I think it's something phenomenon. But they interview a guy who witnessed an anomalous triangle in the UK, and it's like 20 plus years ago. And it wasn't a guy; it was two cooks. And they were working in this restaurant and they had taken their time off. It was a break or whatever. And they went out into the field where they observed this. And this is a very known phenomenon that happened like over 20 years ago, but they obviously reopened the investigation for this documentary. But then they interviewed a guy who worked with the two, and he said they were visited by men in black. And as soon as the men in black visited them, that was it. They were never seen from again, that they literally never showed back up at the restaurant. And he said that all of the people that worked in the kitchen, because they were all like a family, were freaked out about it because they had never, ever heard from them again. That, their house, they were basically just reported as missing persons. And I'll find out what that documentary is so you guys can all watch it. But they interviewed the guy who was friends of them, and it was bizarre because, as he said, the men in black, I was like, well, here we go again. It's another example. But he also mentioned that when they came to the restaurant to interview the two cooks that were actually out there that actually witnessed this anomalous UFO or UAP, that everyone in the restaurant felt drained after, and that they felt like they had like lost life force energy. And this guy was not like one of us. He was completely just a normal person. He didn't understand any of this kind of stuff, but his message. And so it just triggered me instantly. I was like, well, here's another example of what men in black do when they show up.
Well, the draining of energy seems to be, one really common factor. It's like I said, they're parasites. And I think, who was it? I think maybe it was Colin Wilson. I'm not sure. Who wrote
the book, The Occult? The big book?
Yeah, he wrote that book, but I think I don't remember. I don't want to misattribute it, but there was a book called The Mind Parasites. And it was, one of the closest things to the dynamic of the hyperdimensional beings vis-a-vis.
It was Colin Wilson. You got it.
Yeah, you looked it up.
Yeah.
And it was just like a really bizarre story. But as I look at the world today, it's like this sort of thing is rampant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Strange. I mean, there have been some videos shown on X of strange people, in the U.S. Congress, like somebody in the background is
staring at them, like
controlling their mind. Yeah. Just really strange. And then, of course, before that, there have been many, many videos of people behaving in these really odd ways, with and the story of the woman on the airplane who said that, she got off the airplane because the guy was not human.
Not human, yeah.
And, I mean, this kind of stuff, it goes on constantly, continuously.
Yeah.
And, for years, it was all damped down and, covered over, shoved under the rug, because it wasn't acceptable. It's like Coldheart says, when you're in the news business, that this sort of stuff is treated with complete disdain, and it's career ending to really discuss it and get into it. But it still is happening, and now with something like X, you've got people noticing and bringing it up and pointing it out, having videos. So a lot of stuff that used to be never available to the wider public is being shown to the wider public, and and they're all going, what the heck was that, and what's going on? And of course you can write it off as just these people are kind of crazy, and let's bring back insane asylums, and a good portion of it could be just that. But then how many people who are in insane asylums have been attached by some paranormal entity that's draining their energy or putting thoughts into their mind, controlling their sexual behavior, their sexual preferences, selecting their, long-term mates, because that's, something that's quite well known. Somebody gets attached and by some entity, and it wants to have the energy of a specific person, and it makes this person think they're falling in love with that person, so they'll marry them so that they can then have access to the energy they want. So it's one thing I can say, though, is that everything the seas, and that's the Cassiopaeans, were telling us 25 years ago and forward from there, is what we're seeing. And and if what we're seeing and experiencing was described so well by them, then perhaps we should consider that their explanations for why it is the way it is might be considered, because they are fairly rational and logical explanations. And they talk about, the hyperdimensional realms, and that our reality is like an extrusion or a projection, or a subset of a hyperdimensional realm, and that these entities actually do farm us, control us, grow us, create us, even genetically modify us, and think about their ability to use their human tools.
Right.
And you look at this COVID, for example, and the vaccine.
Right.
I mean, it looks like genocide.
Yes, for sure. For sure.
And why would human beings commit genocide, what amounts to auto-genocide?
Right. Right.
Are they under the directive of some entities that know in advance that something or other is going to happen on or to this planet in the not too distant future, and they are eliminating massive numbers of people so that they can maintain control over the situation when some specific events or series of events begin to occur? The seas talk about that sort of thing.
Yes.
And so, that's when you think about them as being parasitical, and that's what the evidence appears to suggest, then you know that they are serving themselves.
Right.
They are not serving humanity, unless, of course, you think it's on a big silver platter. We're here to serve humanity. But so good and evil, What is good? What is evil? I think that's one of the questions we wanted to try to deal with.
I want to get into that, but I want to get your comment on this too. So first off, two points. So about COVID, and I think you and I, the three of us discussed this at one point in the 6 podcast. And guys, I put a link for those of you who are watching. We have over 500 people watching live around the world, so that's awesome. Thank you guys for watching us. I did put a link to our podcast series. There's 6 episodes on my YouTube channel. So I'll reintroduce the link, but if you're interested in what we're talking about, highly recommend you guys go back who haven't watched those podcasts, because they were really amazing. But in 1918 and 1919, and again, there's never a coincidence, 100 years later, we pretty much know now that the Spanish flu was created by the first vaccine that, again, the Rockefeller family created, that they gave the vaccine to both enlisted and drafted men for World War I. They took it in this, by the way, and of course, no coincidence is this either, Fort Detrick. So all the men that got the vaccine in 1917, 18 or whatever, was the impetus or the initial onset of the Spanish flu. And again, the Spanish flu, Laura, killed, and remember the population at that point was way smaller than the population now, but it's all relative, because it was estimated that they killed 28% of the global population over the next 5 years. Now, is it a coincidence that 100 years later, in 2020 and 2021, they started administering, quote unquote, the next vaccine? And again, if it's the Hegelian dialect, problem, reaction, solution, the solution was the vaccine. COVID was just the initiator. But before you comment on this, because it's even more apropos, I want to read this to you. And obviously it's from the same book. It's paranormal parasites. And it's about Bob Lazar. And I know there's a lot of theories that Bob Lazar was mind controlled and he gave truth with error. And he was the guy that said we're containers, which obviously the C's agreed and have said it's the same thing. But this is his exact quote. I want to read this to you guys. So in the 3 months of employment that Lazar enjoyed working at Area 51, again, according to Lazar, he learned a great deal, all of it amazing and life-changing. Had he not quit the program out of a deep concern for his safety, Lazar likely would have learned more. But according to Lazar, he was briefed on the long and winding history of the alien presence on Earth. He was told the aliens were responsible for the creation and development of all of the world's major religions, and that the extraterrestrial creatures came from a faraway star system. And again, hyperdimensional, what does that really mean? More controversially, the aliens had supposedly genetically altered various kinds of early humans, such as the Neanderthals and the Cro-Magnons, that we, Homo sapiens, are now today. None of this, Lazar was told, could ever be shared with the public due to the catastrophic effect it would have on the world of religion and the stability of human civilization. So obviously the C's in your works have said much the same thing. Not, I would say 100% agreement, but a lot of the same thing. So like
99.9, that's pretty close. Yeah.
So where are we? Because I think a lot of people watching this show today, you wouldn't be watching this show today if you were not awake among the awake and aware, the small percentage of humanity that truly is awake and aware. It seems, because you wrote this amazing book, which I have to promote, Paleo Christianity from Paul to Mark, that most of the characters in Abrahamic teachings are based on, oh man, I don't even want to say allegory, different characters throughout different cultures at different timelines. I mean, again, I highly recommend any of you guys, if you haven't read that book or read her book on Paleo Christianity from Paul to Mark, that you read this. I mean, if you want to have a truth bomb dropped on your head, but you should read this book. But I think we're at a time now where people can start accepting the idea that what we hold as our religious, thoughts and processes that we've been inculcated in as children are probably the work of myth, and not only myth, stories that were true, from past cultures, from past civilizations, but the general workings of what people are led to believe from Catholicism, from Judaism, from Islam, even the Eastern religions are really an amalgamation of stories from a long time ago. And a lot of them are not really the truth as people want to think they are.
Well,
I know that's a tough subject.
now the scenario that Mike Bailey gives in his book From Exodus to Arthur is that a lot of the stories that later became foundational to religious myths were actually descriptions of interactions between the Earth and extraterrestrial bodies like comets or asteroids and so forth. And the same thing for astronomer Victor Cook. Now, Mike Bailey is a dendrochronologist,
right?
And I've had a little bit of correspondence with him, and he's very scientific and very practical. But he wrote this really amazing book about From Exodus to Arthur, and then he wrote one about the Black Death, and he, as far as I am concerned, he gives a very compelling case that the Black Death was a comet-borne pathogen that killed, 50% of the planet's population or thereabouts. Some places 75%, some places 25%, some places, it didn't get it. But he and Victor Klube, the astronomer, and he has a writing partner, I forget his name, but he wrote The Cosmic Serpent and The Cosmic Winter. And both of those books, along with Mike Bailey's book, they talk about how these events that were happening in the sky were the foundations or the basis for these myths. For example, when they talk about the Titans, that could be a giant comet that was broken up into pieces, and different pieces of it were, pounding down on the earth at different times. So, a father gave birth to many sons who caused death and destruction to the planet. And if you look at the Carolina Bays in the U.S. and you see the numbers of them and the extent of them, can you imagine the kind of stories people would be telling about, these kinds of overhead aerial explosions that were causing, ablation of the landscape underneath? So, whenever you read in like the Old Testament, the visitation of the Lord, if you read carefully, you can detect that what they're talking about is some kind of catastrophic, cataclysmic interaction with some type of extraterrestrial body or bodies.
Right.
So, but the thing about this is that due to a lot of research that's been done by some really excellent scholars, and I'm big on reading scholarly research because they kind of know what they're doing.
Yeah.
If they're not lying, they know what they're doing, and sometimes they know what they're doing and they lie anyway. But there are groups of them, and this particular group called the Copenhagen School, they're really, really very good, and they've pretty much analyzed the text of the Old Testament and shown that nearly everything in it in the Torah, the first 5 books, and maybe even beyond that, but they were all derived from Greek myths and Mesopotamian myths. And if you go even further back, you can find that there is a crossover between Greek myths and Mesopotamian myths. For example, the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Odyssey of Homer, have some correspondences that are even word for word. So that, it's like, there was they were talking about the same kinds of things. So if the Old Testament is, as a religious historical document, is a fraud, and then I have demonstrated that the origin of the story of Jesus of Nazareth is pretty much, I don't want to call it a fraud exactly, because I explain very carefully throughout the book that there are a lot of true elements to this, and there was a definitive reason for writing this story, for creating it. And it was actually a benevolent reason, so to speak, but it still ended up creating a fraudulent story that has come down to us as though it was, the God's honest truth. And of course, that is the way it was twisted afterwards, after its creation, based on the previous fraud of the Old Testament. And then later along comes Islam, which is, largely based on the Old Testament and the New Testament, which are both, very fraudulent in some respects. So you have a third level. I mean, can we call it a derivative fraud?
Right.
It's like, So, and the reason you can have some confidence in these sorts of things is that, well, I've explained it in exquisite detail in From Paul to Mark.
Right.
The kinds of research that gets done, how they do it, what they're looking for, and then I go through the processes themselves in the book itself, presenting the text and then going through the analyses and so forth, so that that what you're dealing with are, well, they're not what we would consider to be totally reliable. Now, when AI started coming out and becoming popular, I had the idea. I said, well, if you could get an AI, and this AI was programmed to search for, the deepest truths, and if it had the capability to weight sources, because when you're I had to read thousands of scholarly papers and hundreds of scholarly books in order to even be able to write what was in From Paul to Mark. So, and each one you have to weigh them. And when I weigh a source, that means, if they quote something or they said something, I go back to what they're deriving that from. If they're talking about, pottery was found on the Judean desert and it said this and that and the other thing, I'm not going to take his word for it. I'm going to go back and find the original, discussion of this pottery and see if I can get a picture of it and somebody who can, translate it for me. And then you have to look at their history, what their affiliations are. Have they ever been accused of fraud before? Have they ever, fudged on their writing? Have they ever, do they have an agenda? So, that's how I weight a source. I look into it. So if AI could weight sources that way, then it could go through all the scholarly papers in the world, and it could go through, pick a subject, religion, for example, go through all the scholarly papers in the world, weight the sources, make comparisons and come to all of the, and come to some kind of conclusion, what parts of religion, as we've been taught these religions, are valid. And then, of course, it would have to include things like Eric von Daniken, who says that, and he makes a fairly good case for it, that many religious sightings, such as Medjugorje and Fatima in Spain and those sorts of things, that they are engineered by ultra-terrestrials or extraterrestrials in order to, return people to the brainwashing of their faith so that they will not look at the phenomenon scientifically and try to understand it in a rational, reasonable way. Is there some way we can deal with this? And it seems that there is, but it's going to take a unification of a lot of humanity to be able to deal with what we may be facing on our planet, which is our replacement.
Right.
Laura, can I ask you a question? I think the best way to do it would be through analogy, because we mentioned like Tucker Carlson and kind of the rise of like evangelical Christianity in today's world, and the social media thing is kind of bizarre to me, because like I grew up in a household like that, and back then it was like not like pop culture, but now it seems to be like becoming pop culture. And the analogy, and tell me if this is like right or wrong, or it could be adjusted, that like comes up in my head is, if I always like to think of like third density to second density as is fourth density to third density. So if we had second density animals like cows, for instance, that we farm for our food, that we physically eat for energy, and the cows started to find out that they knew what was going on. And they're like, oh, wait a second. Like, we're on this place and they feed us hay, like, oh, we're going to this place and then they're going to chop us up and eat us. They would maybe talk to each other and say like, well, maybe there's a way we could avoid this to stay away from being harvested for food. And with religion, is it a storyline in one sense, because I know it's very multifaceted, but is it a storyline to distract the cattle from the nature of what's really going on with the upper density, like the next density up, to say, oh, this is explaining what you think you're figuring out in a way that kind of like quells the search to find out what's really going on. And so when I hear of like the evangelical stuff now, to me, that's like, is that a way for people that are becoming more aware of the phenomenon of hyperdimensionality, and then kind of sequestering them down a different path to which they don't really find what is the closer source of truth, I guess?
I'd say it's a pretty good analogy. And I mean, I don't like Karl Marx because he was a psychopath of one sort or another. Wasn't he the guy that said, religion is the opiate of the people?
Of the masses, yeah.
Yeah. And in a certain sense, that's true, but only in the sense of these organized, mass consumption type religions. And there can't be much to the religion if they're, I mean, really, really deep, if they can go from early Catholicism or early Protestantism to now they have, LGBTQ flags flying in the sanctuaries, and they've got, I mean, some of the stuff that's going on in churches today is just
insane, literally insane. Insane.
Because I am a real believer in religion in a particular sense. Religion, religare, to bind together.
Right.
That's what the word means. And the things that bind people together. Now, if, for the most part, all things being equal, a family that goes to church and prays together and raises their children in a decent and respectable manner and teaches them morals and principles and, helps them develop backbones and so forth, that's perfect. If whether they're Catholic, whether they're Baptist, Episcopalian, Presbyterian, or even Mormon, whatever, that's fine. But the problem is we're faced with something that's a lot bigger than all things being equal.
Right.
Now, because things are not equal, and we're learning that they're not equal, that they have never been equal.
Right.
They are so unequal that we are at a severe and serious disadvantage to beings that can, pass through walls and, control your mind, control the weather, control animals, remove your spiritual essence from your body and abduct it to a spacecraft, or remove your physical body even and abduct it to a spacecraft and do things to you while you're in that spacecraft. Don't even want to call it a spacecraft. It's a hyperdimensional craft. And then put you back in your body, or put your body back and have those changes manifest within you and have mind control access to you for the rest of your life because of this abduction, and make you think that it was wonderful and beneficial, and they must love you and they're coming here to save us from our own evilness. Meanwhile, they're the ones that are causing all of the conflict and confusion that's going on the planet, because they've got all of these mind parasites, these paranormal beings, critters, or whatever, that glom onto your mental and physical frequency and start sucking your energy out and funneling it elsewhere. We're in a hell of a situation. It's not equal. And just going along with the same old routine and the religion that can morph from something that's good and decent and holy to the unholy messes I'm seeing in churches today, where even the Pope is saying, countries should admit all illegal aliens, or all refugees and so forth. Meanwhile, the United States government and Israel and some of their other buddies are creating the freaking refugees. And it's like, go back and back and back and see, where the first domino fell.
Yeah.
We're in a situation here where there's a whole bunch of dominoes laying on their sides. Well, where did the first domino come from? And we need religion. We need to be bound together, but we need something that is more rational. And I think I have presented it in this book from Paul to Mark, that there is a rational being that is able to aid and assist people, and that there are higher beings of benevolent nature who can assist people. We have ancestors who can assist people. Just because there are all these paranormal critters out there who are on a negative trajectory doesn't mean that there aren't paranormal individuals or entities that are on a positive trajectory. I mean, call them angels and archangels if you want. Call them ancestors. They're it doesn't matter really what you call them. Of course, it's nice if everybody has kind of like a an agreement, a convention on what to call them and what to do. But there is a spiritual world. There is a hyperdimensional world. And these things have tremendous impact on us, even if we're continuously trying to cover over every emergence of this phenomena into our reality, because that's what happens. You know, you cover it over, and you. How can you live with it? How can somebody live with that on a daily? Well, I've been doing it, and it nearly drove me crazy. I mean, I'm telling you, I've been a recluse for the last 20 years, because when I started presenting this kind of thinking, this kind of material, before it was as evident as it is now. There was some evidence then, but not as much as there is now. I mean, a whole program of defamation was launched to just absolutely and utterly destroy me. When they started working against Trump, I recognized that program, because it was done to me. He's got a lot bigger presence, and there was a lot bigger guns brought out on him. But the same patterns and the same groups of liberal type libtards, you know, went after him that went after me. I mean,
So just real quick, just for all of you guys who are watching, there's a lot of people. We have probably about 750 people watching live around the world. And again, thank you guys. If this information is fascinating to you, I just put a link in the YouTube. Well, it's actually in the chat for StreamYard, so you should all see it. But it's to Laura's book series called The Wave on Amazon. It's mandatory reading. Again, if you find this conversation fascinating, those books are mandatory reading. Seminal books for me and Hunter, and for hundreds of thousands, hopefully, of other people around the world, which is still a small percentage of people. But I mean, we could go on and on this show about religion and what it's done to people. I think that I agree with you that, you know, we're all, as I like to say, holographic fractals of the source consciousness of the creator of all, whatever you want to call it. And we're all bound and tied together at that level, but it's just, we're not all equally aware of like what's going on. And I think so many people, you know, want to put an external savior to everything in their life, from religion to their leaders, to their politicians, to whoever it is. And it's like, it's an inside job, and you have to become your own savior. You know, just like Hunter and I talk about in our health optimization realm, you got to become the proactive scientist of your own health, because there's nobody coming to save you. You know, your doctor is not out there going through your medical records, attempting to look at what you may or may not contract as you age. And so you have to take that control upon yourself, and everyone is capable of doing that. But like you say in your books, and you stress in your works, you know, you have to seek knowledge. You have to become aware that the greatest threat to, quote unquote, the enemy is being ignorant of the enemy.
Well, let me say,
go ahead.
Insert something right here. I am very thankful when people buy my books, but I want people to know that I considered all of this information to be so important that it is available on the internet for free. Every word.
Exactly.
Every one of my books is posted on the Cassiopaea.org website, and you can read it there. And From Paul to Mark is posted in what do you call it? Academia edu.
Mm-hmm.
And for those people who cannot afford to purchase the books, you still can read them. If you can afford it, thank you so much for purchasing them. But if you can't, I still want you to read them. I still want to make it available. Every word of it is there.
Yeah, and I'll post the
link. I'll also add to that too, for people that can't read books anymore, because most people have to listen to stuff now. There are apps. There are actually apps now. It's called Speechify is one. I actually use it sometimes when I'm reading on my like cardio machine. That you can get Laura's books on Kindle, and then it will actually like have a voice play the text to you, like an AI voice play the text to you, where it sounds like someone's reading it, and so you can actually listen to it. For people that don't, I always tell people not now, because like so many people don't even read books, and they're like, "Oh, is it on audiobook?" And I say, because there's not audiobooks right now, but you can actually listen to it if you download that Speechify app. So I'll just add add that in for the listeners.
So, I hope that, as many people as possible who can afford it will buy them, because it helps keep us, functioning. But, I never, ever wanted to, put anything out there that depended on somebody buying it, for them to have it if they couldn't afford it.
Yeah. I mean, the works are life-changing for all of you guys that have not read these books. And, it really is. The way Laura writes is she's read and become, an expert on a lot of different things. And she synthesizes all the smartest people, probably in the history of humanity, who have read, or written similar works or similar things that she talks about. And then she has this ability to synthesize it all and summarize it in an amazing fashion. And again, all of her books, there's literally 8 books in the series, are profound. It changed my life. They changed Hunter's life. They changed many of your lives. I know there's many of you that have read these books that are watching this today, but I kind of want, if we can, there's a bunch of other topics we want to talk about, but I do want to shift into where we're going, right? Because obviously we know where we've been, and now it's like we're in the present moment, and where are we going? And I think it kind of segues with Trump is coming in, on Monday, and the Maha movement is big. I mean, I have my shirt, which I'm not wearing right now. I should have worn that today. I didn't even think about that, but it's Make America Healthy Again, make the world healthy again. We have RFK Jr. saying a lot of things. Nobody even knows if he's going to get confirmed. It's probably an uphill battle, but obviously my business, Hunter's business, our lives, revolve around a less restrictive FDA, a less restrictive big government when it comes to peptides and all these wonderful, call them biochemical medical breakthroughs and enhancements. We're literally right now on the edge of a golden age for that stuff. But it's like, what really is going to happen, Laura? Because, I could make an argument if the hyperdimensionals are in control of our government. And again, the C's have told us they are. I always remember, that one session you guys did, I think probably in like the early 2000s, about presidential elections. And it was like, you guys asked about an election. Are there any elections? And they said there are none, that there's no elections, that they're all just for show. So at this point, Trump being back in, the same guy who 4 years ago was vilified and, abhorred, and they stole the election then. We all know that. It's obvious. There's been so much that's coming out. The Italian, was it the Italian? I can't remember. Some sort of special agency in Italy did a thing back in 2021, and they analyzed what was going on. And it was clearly the election, that votes were changed. But knowing that the apparatus of the deep state, or the whatever you want to call them, the dark side, the fourth density dark side, can rig the apparatus and can control. What would make us think that this is not arranged? That Trump coming into power, wasn't the mandate that we all think. And again, I'm asking a question. I don't know, but it wasn't the mandate that has been made out to look to be. Yes, we all know that people turned against, the trans stuff and, all that stuff. And obviously a lot of the craziness that was around that. But is this possibility now that, Musk is aligned with Bezos and aligned with Zuckerberg, and all these people are supposedly are a part of Trump? Is it potentially a psyop?
Potentially, but I also think that, first of all, there were an awful lot of people waking up. I mean,
for sure.
The 4 years of the Biden presidency were so horrific that, and the obviousness of their lawfare against Trump, and things like, for example, WikiLeaks. Supposedly Julian Assange says the reason there's no expose on Donald Trump is because there wasn't anything. He said some inappropriate things, or, maybe did some mildly inappropriate things at a couple of points in his life. Who the heck doesn't? But there was nothing, he's not motivated by money. He's got money. Nearly everybody else who goes into politics is motivated by money. So there is a real possibility that with a team such as he's picked, and I'm not happy with all of his picks. But there may be pressures on him that we don't know anything about, so I'm willing to wait and see. There is a possibility that things could, in some ways, improve, or at least help level the playing field. But at the same time, that there is going to be a tremendous backlash from the dark side, if you want to call it that. And things could get extremely chaotic very quickly. I mean, who was it? Who was it that told Trump, we have 6 ways, the CIA has 6 ways to Sunday to get to you?
Right.
It was James Clapper said that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Him or John Brennan. Him or John Brennan, one of the two.
He's not lying.
Very pleasant man.
So even if Trump were to decide to, follow up on JFK's intentions and scatter the CIA to the 4 winds, we don't know that he would necessarily be able to do that, because these agencies have created networks of money-making operations that are outside the purview of the U.S. government and Congress. They could simply just go deep, dark underground and continue to operate because they've got, millions and millions of dollars. They don't have to get it from Congress. So the kind of chaos that might bring on. And then, of course, they've got their mind control operations, things like, what did they call it? MK Ultra, the mind control thing. Yeah, so they've got things like that. So they've got a lot of, what would you call them, Manchurian candidate types, or, and I came across some of those during my days doing hypnotherapy. Some really, one of the scariest sessions I ever did was some gal that was active in the New Age community as she was taking oral photographs and doing different kinds of things and giving talks and so forth. Yeah, and she was basically mind programmed. Her father was a Navy SEAL, by the way. A lot of these guys tend to have military fathers.
Oh yeah.
And she was turned out to be, what would you call it, green bombed. And that was really spooky as all get out. So there are all kinds of people out there and that have been programmed and set ready to, set them off by like bombs throughout society. So there could be revolutions, civil war.
Right.
Trump's got his hands
out for him. Yeah.
full. Really, he's got his hands full. So, when we realized, this was some time ago, and we were, we have weekly meetings with our membership, people who are members of our Paleo Christianity organization. It's a religious organization, but it's not exactly a religion.
Right.
When I filled out the form for the IRS, I answered the questions honestly. I asked, do you have, some human representative that you worship or honor or something? I said, no. So we have these meetings, and I utilize my ability with hypnotherapy to put everybody into deep trances. And I'm revealing this kind of for the first time. We have membership, hundreds of members all around the planet. And we have these Zoom meetings, and there are hundreds of members of the Zoom meetings. And everybody goes into a state of really deep meditation, guided meditation. And then we experiment with creating things in hyperdimensional reality. And we experiment in, things like healing or protection and so forth. And we've been protecting Vladimir Putin for several years now. And apparently it worked. And so 2 weeks, just about 2 weeks before Trump's assassination attempt, we had our meeting, and I said, I think we ought to do something for Trump. And we do these protection. I mean, it's not just praying. I mean, a lot of people are praying for Trump, and Trump is asking for prayers. So I figured he's asking for prayers. We're not violating his free will by extending our particular brand of protection to him. So let us do so. So we did our mass visualization, which amounts to, a prayer by, a focused, coherent prayer that everybody is thinking and doing the same thing at the same time from hundreds of places around the planet at the same time. And we put protection around Donald Trump of a specific sort. And it wasn't 2 weeks later that event occurred, where he turned his head right at the exact moment that he needed to turn his head to save his life, because he would have been dead had he not. And of course, everybody is, and who's to say? I mean, so many people were praying for him. We were doing it in our way, but I felt rather confident that, because I've done other experiments, we've done other experiments, that what we do is particularly effective. And we will continue to do that. And we will continue, we may extend it to other people who are asking for prayers, but we will not do this for anybody who's not asking to be prayed for. It's a violation of free will. If they don't want to be prayed for, you can't do it.
Yeah.
So I just think that our future is possibly extremely interesting. Extremely chaotic.
Statement.
And the guys told me, why don't you talk about comets again? Because they wanted me to have another explosion outside the window. And I says, no way am I going to talk about comets.
That's an inside story for those of you guys that haven't watched the podcast, but in episode 5, in the middle of our live, it wasn't live like this is live, but it was being recorded, the three of us, there was like a explosion outside of Laura's window, and we all heard it. It literally sounded to me and Hunter like a shotgun blast. And she had to, like, we kind of stopped, and she called her husband Ark and was like, what was that? What just happened? And you guys thought it was a bird that maybe hit the window or something like that, but then you realized it wasn't a bird. And so it was basically a hyperdimensional intrusion.
Yeah, it was kind of weird, because it said exactly as I said, whether it's going to be comets or war or whatever, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. As soon as I said that, boom.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what it meant, that there will be comets and there will be war.
So I just got this message from somebody who's very much in the know and is friends with everyone on this show. And he just sent me this, and it's very interesting. And it says it's from Brandon Biggs, who famously predicted the first assassination attempt on Trump, is now claiming to have visions of a massive bomb attack during Trump's inauguration on Monday. He foresees large trucks carrying 50-gallon drums and a dump truck packed with fertilizer. So it's going to be like a crude, dirty bomb. But look, who knows what's going to happen? But I think we all expect the unexpected. And clearly, this peaceful transition of power from Biden, or the actor known as Joe Biden, whoever Joe Biden is or was, the first day after Trump won, they just acquiesced. And they were using words like peaceful transition. We're going to give President Trump all he needs and all his resources. And anybody who knows what's been going on between the deep state war, was like, wait a minute. They've been trying to kill him. They've tried to kill him 3 times. They tried to just smear his reputation, put him in prison, do all these things. This doesn't make sense. So it's, again, we're like, in Sun Tzu, The Art of War, right? Keep your friends close, your enemies close, and your friends close and your enemies closer. It seems like something else. We're all expecting something else to happen, Laura.
Yeah. And everything that has happened, I mean, for the last 30 years, the C's told us what was going to happen. We simply didn't have the imagination to be able to picture how you could get from point A to point B. And there were a number of books written, 20, 30 years ago. One called The Hidden Dangers of the Rainbow. I don't know if you've ever heard of that book or read that book, but it was written by a Christian woman, and she was talking about the secular humanism that was taking over young people in colleges and universities. And damned if she wasn't right about just everything. And but it's how we got there is like unbelievable. How we got to having a fake pandemic. I mean, and it was fake, and I knew it was fake from the beginning. If you've got a real pandemic, you find people dying on the streets. Everything was normal. The hospitals were empty.
Yeah.
So, I think we're in for some thrills and chills. Kind of like a roller coaster ride.
Right.
I just read today that the DC police are refusing to protect Donald Trump. And that is the most outrageous thing I've ever heard in my life. I mean, every single one of them needs to be fired, and they need to get some. I mean, let's face it, the majority of people in the United States are conservative. I believe that.
Right. There's a fact. That's a fact. That's actually a fact. It's a fact.
And if that's the case, then there is a pathological minority in positions of power in police departments and government, and bureaucracies and so forth. We can fire all of them and replace them easily with talented and educated conservatives. And, maybe they should think about that before they start showing their backsides in such an obnoxious way.
Laura, I was going to ask you, some of these events, like, the fires in Los Angeles.
I was just going to go there.
Some of these things, seeing that happen, of course, now when I see events happen, I'm immediately thinking hyperdimensionality. What is at play here? Because there's layers, levels, and, multi dimensions at play. Can it be one of those things where there's like a physical aspect and then obviously like the hyperdimensional aspect? And do you think those are precipitory, meaning they're like bringing about some of these more like earth change events, like comets and whatever, because of the behavior? Because Jay and I we were kind of joking, we were kind of serious. Like, Southern California is a cancer now to the people, like the culture, the land, the civilization there, more or less is a cancer. The homelessness to everyone around that is attempting or doing their best to live a life. And
it's also Northern California too.
Yeah, Northern California as well, and San Francisco.
Yeah, there's a lot of things like that. But it exemplifies, because it's all the, the stars are who, aid and abet the hyperdimensional parasites, to effect their control over human beings. If I could convince people that there is a hyperdimensional realm that controls our own, and you have to be careful of your very thoughts, because they can control your thoughts. You have to be careful about your relationships. You have to have a network that you can exchange information with, observations, and compare and contrast and discuss to figure out whether, what is going on is the reality, or if it's something that's being planted in your head, or being, you're thinking things that shouldn't be thought because they're not part of you. If I could convince people of that, life would be a lot easier for everybody. They would all, we'd go around saying, why did I think that thought? Why did I have the idea that I don't?
Implanted.
And the thing is, the unexamined life is not worth living. And this is just another level of examining your life.
That's right.
And figuring out what's going on. I mean, are you having a fight with your wife or your husband because you've been zapped by some kind of mind control program? Did they start beaming some kind of energy waves that, activate nanobots in your body that you now have from the COVID jab, and that they're going to either make you sick or make you crazy? I mean, people really need to wake up. I've been trying, like I said, I went into a situation for the last 20 years because I just, it was just too much. But I did. Throughout that time, every book I have written has been on the internet. It's there for anybody who's searching to find. Of course, Google has put me like, way down. I mean, and references in my books, they're posted on the internet will not come up in a Google search.
Yeah.
You have to deliberately put in, the name of the website in order to get any returns. So, but it's there. And I wish I could convince more people that it's a reality that we have to contend with, and the evidence is laid out piece by piece by piece by piece through 8 volumes.
Nothing that you've said or that the seas have confirmed. I mean, I shouldn't say nothing. There's been a couple. I mean, obviously time is not linear, and time is dynamic and ever evolving, but it's all added up. I mean, there's a link, to talk about the fires. The thing that blows my mind is, now there's videos, they can't escape, right? Like the hyperdimensional aspect of this is they can control a lot of things. And we know they're going back and forth in time to alter the timelines, but they can't escape the videos now of technology in modern times. And there's citizen journalists and people with cameras and planes and helicopters and, surveillance, surveillance is everywhere. There's a video that's circulating right now that I retweeted yesterday on X that got a lot of views, and it shows a neighborhood that it was like a tract of homes in Palisades or somewhere north of Palisades where there were only 2 houses, Laura, that were incinerated.
I saw that.
Yes. And none of the other houses or the vegetation around it. And it's like, when I see people in California, and by the way, you already just said it, Hunter, and we need to stress this. Most of the blue check cities are massive mind control, like dumps. Like these are places where if you're in these cities, they are hitting you with HARP and God knows what else, 5G, 6G, Wi-Fi. I mean, there is so much mind control. Microwaves, exactly. Strobe lights from your TVs. The bigger and bigger the TVs get, the more mind controlled and trained people become. That blows my mind too. But I mean, like, it's crazy because like a person removed and watching those videos and who has half a brain and is somewhat awake and aware has seen what happened in Maui. They saw what happened in the Davis fires back in 2017, where the exact same thing happened, which was the first time in California that it started happening. And it's obvious this is directed energy weaponry. And it's not just directed energy weaponry, it's smart meters. And all you have to do is trace the path of the smart meters and how they can heat up with, because they're lithium powered, and how lithium can just be like a powder charge. And that's what they're doing. And it's so obvious. And the more and more I see these people, citizen journalists call them on Twitter, who think they're smart guys living in California, who do these like 20 posts or 25 post threads on what really happened. And none of them talk about that. It's like, dude, you're missing the bigger picture here. People that are in the, that are part of it, call them the undergrounders or, the misinformers or the controlled disinformers, whatever you want to call them. I could use one of their names, Hunter. I want to, but I won't, because I don't want to bring anything else upon me. But this guy is literally a big name, and he's in LA videotaping a quote unquote homeless person starting a fire, and then creating that diversionary smoke screen, throughout all of the LA basin to make people think that it's homeless people starting the fires. And so they can now carry that narrative. And it's like, this is insane. Sure, there are some deranged meth addicts starting fires like they are everywhere else, but they're not starting blazes in subdivisions that liquefy metal, incinerate foundations, and leaves trees and vegetation 5 feet from the property completely unscathed. It's insanity that people don't see what's really going on at this point.
Yeah, and the thing is, there can be multiple things going on.
Exactly.
And that is almost, a sure sign that that's being done to cover up the main thing that's being done.
Right.
See? Because all of those other things can be and probably are to some extent true. But they are there as diversionary tactics. They're there as cover, smoke screens, So everything is going on, and it's just absolutely crazy. And we have I think we've got the Seas gave the watchword for the upcoming year is thrills. And when you have thrills, you think of roller coasters and, really.
Question for you, Hunter, before, because I know you have a comment. Are we, as any of us, or all of us, or again, any of us, ever going to get any kind of names from the Epstein list or from the Diddy list, or is that just another giant gaslight?
I think they're going to try to release that kind of stuff, and it's just going to create more. It's going to create more chaos. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say too, obviously I'm in North Carolina. I wasn't affected by the hurricane or anything, but just kind of having been through there, like some of the devastation that has happened there. When you're away from some of these things like the fires or hurricane damage or whatever, it just kind of seems like, oh, it's but then when you see it up close and personal, it's like, whoa, it's real. And then to what you were saying, Laura, is like those things can happen too. And then what happens is very similar to religion, to like when someone's like, okay, they realize this is demonic, for lack of a better word, but then they kind of say, okay, it's demonic, therefore it compartmentalizes with this form of religion, therefore that's all there is. And there's way more to it. And then, like looking at some of the stuff that happened with the fires or the hurricanes, is like, yeah, there was this one event that happened. There was, I guess, a good way to say it, Jay and I joke, hyperdimensional shenanigans. So there's like all these different shenanigans going on that is really beyond the scope of, I think, what we can interpret with our senses and like in real time be able to track. But if you kind of zoom out, we were talking about this the other night. 9/11 now, I think the majority of people would agree that 9/11 was BS. Like it was not what
it was an inside job.
Yeah, an inside job. Very, very cut and dry now. If you're like a rational person, don't care about politics. If you're a rational person, you examine it for 20 minutes. You say, okay, there's weird stuff going on here. But what's weird is like now we're in this, when you're in something happening, people, they seem to lose that perspective that like there's bigger things at play here. And maybe it's just that they overwhelm us with stuff. So it's like, oh, there's fires now. Oh, okay. Like that's happening, like, and then you move to the next thing. And then before you know it, you're kind of caught up in this, and it becomes harder to like examine the way we would like a historical event, I guess. So,
well, it's the old forest and trees conundrum. You see so many trees, you can't see the forest. All you're seeing is trees. You have to back away and get some perspective. You have to kind of like, sit down and adopt a beginner's mind and say, what's really going on here? What is really important? And, that's kind of what I did when I wrote The Wave. It's like, let me take on a beginner's mind and look at all of these phenomena that, we're confronted with and, see what we can make out of it. And the only conclusion is that we are being manipulated, controlled, fed upon, just all kinds of things that are not very pleasant. And I think that I think there is a difference between us and animals, because we have the ability to self-reflect,
right?
Which is something that animals don't have. Which is not to say that they won't, by some way or means of reincarnation and advancing through the through the food chain, become smarter or whatever. And I don't think they would become smarter as animals because they're constrained by their physiology. But we still, and I think a big part of what we have, this ability to self-reflect, this consciousness, is part of the food of the next density up. We feed on the flesh of animals. They feed on this energy of consciousness from us. They also, apparently, for various purposes, feed on flesh. I mean, that's pretty evident from some of the research that cow blood and human blood and human mutilations and cow mutilations, and I mean even the ancient stories of human sacrifice. But when you have human sacrifice, what's being fed on is the energy, the suffering, the thing that's being released as the person is being horribly mutilated and killed in in an effort to appease a dark and savage god. So yeah, I want people to please just read the wave, read it and evaluate it. Read from Paul to Mark. If you want to understand, the Cassiopaean experiment and the rationale behind it and how I went about it, read Amazing Grace, which is kind of like my story, about how I was thinking and how I, what my background was and what kind of things I practiced and learned and did. And I mean, everything is out there. It's out there for free. I appreciate it if you buy the books.
Just read, period. Read. Don't watch Instagram or TikTok, which you can't, I guess, watch TikTok in the United States until Trump revives it on Monday.
Who knows?
If reading with your eyes is not an option, and I can understand that because I had my cataract surgery on both eyes done a couple of years ago. Because I read so much, I literally blew my eyes out. Get some of these, get it on Kindle and get this automatic reader thing that'll read it to you. I mean, we've been talking about putting them in audiobooks, but we've been having a little bit of trouble trying to figure out what kind of voice to use. I mean, should I sit down and read them? And if so, when we come to the passages from the seas, what voice should we use? We've had a lot of discussions like that. How are we going to do this? So, yeah, we're in for a rough ride, some thrills, and I think there's going to be phenomena on the land, on the sea, and this is directly from the seas and in the air, and people are going to be thrilled by what's happening.
Yeah, I think to wrap this show up, because it's been going for an hour and 40 minutes. And I mean, honestly, we could keep going if you want to keep going, because we literally have over 800 people watching live. But I know it's getting late. And again, thanks to everyone who's been watching. I think just from some strategies for everyone, to end this, to move forward is, like you said, knowledge protects, ignorance endangers. Become more and more aware. Somebody just wrote, Quantum FX just wrote, that we can connect to those that are high vibrational now more than ever in history. It's correct. A great option right now is to raise your frequency, to serve others and not serve self. And to understand that, again, at the end of the day, and at least in my opinion, and I know your guys' opinion and most of you guys watching, I mean, we are divine spiritual energy beings at base essence. We're not these physical avatar bodies. We're in these physical avatar bodies, but this is not all we are. And so, like, you got to kind of get out of that mindset that all you are is this body. I think, Laura, so many people are just so caught up in the materialistic, the mechanistic, the atomistic, idea of all they are is this physical body.
Let me say something.
Sure.
We have brains.
Right.
And the seas have told us numerous times that the reason for their communication with us was to teach us to use our most valuable possession, our brains.
Right.
So in addition to being spiritual beings, we also have brains, and we need to use those brains to learn and examine and network and make this, choices and decisions that lead us out of the labyrinth into the light. Continue.
No, beautiful. I mean, that can wrap it up. Hunter, you get the final say.
Well, it's funny. I was thinking this morning, like, does ChatGPT and AI, does it make people smarter or does it make people stupider? Because I can say,
yeah.
Because in one way, like, we never have had more access. Like, I have learned probably more now, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, because of like the interface that it is. I can learn it certain things at a much better speed because I don't have to sort through Google to like find the information that I made. It's a little bit quicker in sourcing information, but the other, it makes people dumber because they no longer can do anything. They can't like do math. They can't do anything. And they just kind of put in there and then they get back an answer that may or not be right, but they're just kind of going with it because it's right. And so I think to Laura's point is like, or maybe you can close, Laura, of like, what is a good way now with all of this information we have? Like, what is actually the best way to use our brain because I think a lot of people, I kid you not, I've heard smart people say, I get my best information from TikTok. And when I hear that, it kind of makes me think, like, how could TikTok, which is a manipulated algorithm, give you the best information? I don't think that's to be true. So what would be like the best way to use your brain now?
X is pretty much a manipulated algorithm too, but we still in all, we still, have a better advantage of finding out what's going on via X than other methods. How long that will last, I don't know. And I'm, very aware that it's manipulated. But having said that, I think probably the best way to develop your brain, your thinking capacity, is number one, to read, listen to audiobooks, and number two, to network with other people.
Right.
Consult, compare, discuss, share. Sharing your experiences, your information. Okay, on our forum, we have lots of people that go on X and they find out some piece of information. They take it and they post it on the forum and they discuss it and they research it. And then they try to find out, what is behind it, what's true about it, what is not true about it. And we've been doing this for 25 years now, discussing things, to the tiniest micrometer of precision, of understanding that we can acquire. So discussing, reading, sharing, consulting, and of course X is like a big network of sharing too, so it's just that you don't really get to discuss it in the in-depth way we do on our forum, but still in all, it's not bad, and in a certain sense it has leveled the playing field a little bit. It could be a lot more level, and it should be a lot more level, but we can hope and just do the best we can. So I think that we're definitely in a position now that things could go either way. Right now, either way, we're at a crossroad. Can we come together? Can we acquire true religion that is being bound together? Or are we going to be replaced and, forgotten?
It's a really interesting question. I just gave the link to all of you guys watching to the website, the Cassiopaea forum. It's Cassiopaea.org /forum, or just go to Cassiopaea.org and register. There's a lot of people that are watching the show, and a lot of people like me and Hunter are members there, and it's free to register. Don't go in there doing anything stupid. Not going to let you start rambling on. You have to earn your keep there, but it's an amazing forum. There's all sorts of information. You can get lost there. I have to keep myself off there as much as possible during the weekdays, because then I'll never get any work accomplished, because there's so much fascinating information. But Laura, this has been amazing. I would just ask, as it gets crazier and crazier, if we can, I think we should probably do this at least once a month, if not once a quarter, rather than doing it, every like 8 months or 9 months, I think, since the last time that we did a show. So I'll leave that up to you, because all of us are putting out amazing amounts of energy and work and content and stuff like that. But I would love to do that, and know Hunter's with me.
All right, then.
Perfect. All right, guys. So for Jay Campbell, Hunter Williams, and of course, Laura Knight-Jadczyk, we will see you guys when we see you. Raise your vibration to optimize your love creation. We will see all of you guys very soon. Peace.